So, post-pandemic trends and insights. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Mary Charleson, and yes, I am the president of Charleson Communications and the founder of 5minutemarketing.com. What a journey we've been on since March 2020. Last November, I joined the group to talk about consumer trends early on in the pandemic. This time last year, we were in the thick of it, still very much reconciling the major consumer shifts that were taking place around us. You might recall we were talking about things like safety needs were our major motivators: food, shelter, safety. We were hoarding toilet paper, hand sanitizer, masks. Our workplaces were shifting to home because Zoom was still a novelty. Online shopping had increased. There was an increase in online social media use. Focus on self-improvement, workouts at home, yoga, self-improvement courses. The do-it-yourself culture was on the rise: bread making, victory gardens, haircuts. Hyper-localized focus, largely driven by travel restrictions. Our interactions had gone virtual. People were economizing. Behaviors and new shopping patterns were becoming habits. There was a threat of fear remaining long-term, and we're going to revisit that one in a moment. And word of mouth was becoming more important than ever. Wow. Time indeed is marching along. This time, I'm going to bring to you 5 consumer trends that have emerged since then that will impact the next several years. But I'm first going to frame them from the reference of 2 big macro trends related to digital marketing. These macro trends would likely have happened anyway, but when meshed with the shifts that we see in consumer trends, that is where we're likely to see opportunity. Marketing encompasses more than social media, to be sure, but because so many of us rely on social media as small and medium-sized businesses, knowledge about what is coming is key. So the first one is social media regulation. We've been living in a wild west since social media emerged in 2005. But allegations of fake and misleading news, which first emerged during political events in the US and Europe, have now boiled over into more during the pandemic. Layered in there is increasing awareness of social media addiction, bullying, and psychological damage to youth. Plus, there's a rising tide and actions being taken to protect privacy and the use of personal data for commercial gain. Add to the boiling cauldron a scandal: a Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, and the ensuing PR fiasco for Facebook. You'll recall how documents surfaced showing Facebook's awareness of harm caused, but still erring on the side of favoring profits. Some have called this Facebook's tobacco moment, but I would argue it's an alarm call for all social platforms. Without a doubt, regulation is coming. The US First Amendment about free speech has driven predominantly US-based social media companies to remain untouched. But regulation is inevitable, and we just need to look at history to see how that is going to unfold. A century ago, Hollywood mirrored today's kind of Silicon Valley, small group of coastal elites take advantage of a new type of communication, which was movies, to allow them to largely define the topics and the narrative for a country. And lawmakers were keen, for the new tech, and so they essentially were, initially hands off. But eventually, the boundaries, pushing content, prioritizing profit over morality reached a limit, and the societal concerns also emerged. And so, rules around content for children, ratings, regulations ensued. And we saw the same thing unfold with radio and TV throughout the same cycles: initial freedom, then self-regulation, then eventually forced regulation. And so we're at that crux of that right now, but with global reach of a predominantly US-based series of platforms. And that's the challenge. How do you regulate something that is not defined by country boundaries? Plus, traditional regulations were for communication companies with editorial oversight. Social media are publishers of content, but they're not the content creators. And that's kind of the loophole that they've farmed with all of this. The EU will push the hardest first, and it has been, but other countries are likely to follow. Australia has a new online privacy bill. Canada's talking about it. It really is just a matter of time. And some of this is being driven by the tech companies themselves. Apple, most recently, their update with the app tracking transparency, the ATT, platforms need to ask users now to allow tracking across apps and websites. Facebook, or now Meta, had their revenue impacted by 13% by this app tracking transparency. And collectively, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and YouTube lost $10 billion in revenue in the second half of 2021. So what's the bottom line for you? Audience data and will be impacted because you won't be able to save as much information. Your targeted ads are likely to be less impactful just because it's not as good at micro targeting. And there will be less organic reach as the companies squeeze revenue even more from their paid content to make up the difference. So I guess, the question is, to ask is, are you heavily reliant on social media to connect with your customers? You need to own your list and direct contact with them and rely less on social media. Now, I'm not saying you should go away from it at all. By all means, leverage your social media. It's a great, great engagement tool. But we need to start thinking about it from more of a top of funnel perspective, where you use it as a way to introduce people to your brand, start to build a know-like trust, and you may continue the engagement there, but at some point move them into a channel that you own so that you can continue to nurture the relationship there. That could be through your website, your e-newsletter, or your podcast, as an example. So be prepared for less organic, more pay to play. We perhaps could see that in Facebook groups, and less effective targeting with your paid ads. Several progressive thought leaders are out there right now, are all advocating this kind of diversification using social, but building your list as a way to build those relationships. And this is interesting for me to watch because I've always had this approach. And it's something that I advocate very strongly for in my marketing and media online course. It's kind of like it's almost come full circle. The second global trend, the Metasphere. Augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. By now, you've likely heard about Facebook's rebranding as Meta on October 28th. Individual brands that the company owns, such as Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp, will remain their individual identity. Sort of think Google and Alphabet as a parallel. Rebranding as Meta is a bit of a branding name grab, though, since many companies will ultimately be playing in the Metasphere, and then that will be a huge part of Web 3.0. As a parallel, it would not unlike IBM deciding to call themselves Internet in 2000. Web 2.0 was an upgrade from the read-write Internet of 1.0, and Web 2.0 gave us a social media, interactive content, information at our fingertips. Web 3.0 introduces artificial intelligence, 3D graphics, immersive interactions through augmented reality and virtual reality, decentralized infrastructure using blockchain technology, which promises to kind of ensure our loss of surveillance, or kind of helping us be surveilled less and less use of our own data. It's yet to be seen how that will all unfold. So Meta, why are they doing this? It might be easy to dismiss it as a kind of a rebranding exercise for Facebook, but I think it's a lot more complicated than that. In the past, Facebook parent company focused on the Facebook app. Now we have the metaverse, and Meta's focus will be to bring the metaverse to life. It would be like sort of a hybrid of today's online social experiences, sometimes expanded into three, kind of third dimensions, or projecting into the physical world. Think immersive experiences with other people, even when you can't be together, or doing things you couldn't do in a physical world. It will be the next evolution of social technology and the internet. And there's a lot of Silicon Valley interest in this augmented reality and virtual reality space. It all sounds a bit Star Trek to me at this stage. Zucker's data, I admit it's a disturbing parallel. But Mark Zuckerberg appears ready to stake his company on the metaverse as a first mover. It's a pretty smart business move. He's partnered with Ray-Ban to produce augmented reality glasses. He's hired data scientists, engineers, and developers in the virtual reality space. It's more planned and purposeful than a rebrand to get out of Dodge, in my opinion. So augmented reality and virtual reality and the Metasphere. Will we all be running around with these big clunky things on our faces? I certainly hope not. But let's assume that these are kind of the early versions of this, kind of the equivalent of this. Remember the brick cell phone that we used to carry around? As I mentioned, Facebook has partnered with Ray-Ban, to produce augmented reality glasses. And they'll make the web immersive and not so geeky looking at all. Here's an example of what augmented reality could be. It shows a real world environment and adds computer generated input to it. As augmented reality technology matures, the number of applications will continue to grow and influence our shopping, entertainment, work, and more. We can expect that with Web 3.0. Augmented reality could help us try on clothes, as an example, in a retail environment or online. IKEA has an augmented reality app already, showing you how an item would look in your home. Augmented reality can also boost sales. The Retail Council recently did a study and found that 72% of customers purchased products that they hadn't planned on after using augmented reality. Virtual reality in the classroom, bringing science concepts to life with virtual reality. Or how about a virtual reality panel projection at live events? We can see the two gals in the middle there are part of that VR experience. And some early adopters, like Peter Diamandis, are using VR and hologram projection to speak to audiences without ever getting on a plane. You might notice here that there is a screen, and he is projected on this screen, see-through to the curtains behind. Peter is actually in a production studio with a green screen, miles and miles away. But if you go on and you watch his speaker video, you can see the audience reaction to this. And it is pretty compelling to see it as a video in real life. This is where we're headed, folks. That's pretty crazy. So we were already pushing the boundaries of AR, VR, and AI. The pandemic accelerated it. And make no mistake, all of these Silicon Valley companies want a piece of Meta, that AR, VR space. The opportunities are endless. Whether it be construction and design, tourism, destination marketing, education, healthcare, we've demonstrated a comfort with moving our activities from industries to online in these industries to online during the pandemic. And that has set us up for an accelerated adaptation to Web 3.0 technologies. But it's Zuck who wants to try to own it first. Stay tuned. And just when you need your head to spin a little bit more, cryptocurrency is tied to it. Yes, Bitcoin. In the Metasphere, things like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies become useful, as do NFTs, non-fungible tokens. It's a one-of-a-kind digital asset that exists on a blockchain currency and gives the buyer digital ownership rights. The thing that's new in Internet 3.0 is that VR and AR and digital currency and buying digital tokens that represent real-world assets will be the new normal. Some of this may be years away, but knowledge is power in anticipating where things could shift to. Is your mind spinning yet? So the Metasphere, augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. How will the Metasphere impact you? So you might be musing, cool, maybe cool, or like, yeah, whatever, I don't really get it. And that's okay. But let's noodle on this for a little bit. If somebody is immersed in a virtual world, how might you as an advertiser show up? Could experiences be sponsored? Could you touch or feel a product? How could speakers or educators show up in this virtual world? How about a hotel using VR to show a potential guest around the property and their room before booking? AR could be used to complement real-life city tours, right? Highlight historical facts when you're looking at buildings in a particular area. Lots of people want to continue to work remotely. Perhaps having a hologram take your place is the answer to filling office space. Beam me up, Scotty. The concept is actually pretty exciting, but it's a slippery slope. And to be clear, I have mixed feelings about this. It's troubling to think of all the real-time behavioral data that could be collected and monetized. And we've still yet to have the conversation about societal impacts, mixed realities, psychological impacts. All of this potentially is quite interesting. So what about your Facebook advertising? Meta for Business is now a Facebook page. It was switched from Facebook for Business on October 28th. So Meta will now integrate ad and content options across all platforms that they own: Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp. We expect that to include AR and VR stuff in the future. It all seems a bit wild to me right now, but knowledge is power. And as we said, this is where the digital world in Silicon Valley wants to take us. So, okay, that was the big picture stuff related to digital and social media. I realize your head is likely spinning a bit, so let's dive into the consumer side and take a look at 5 trends to watch. The Great Resignation. 11.5 million workers quit their jobs in 2021. 4 in 10, or 40%, plan to leave or change jobs in the next 3 to 6 months, according to a Harvard Business Review article. So what the heck is going on? There's burnout at play, but there's a whole lot more. We can see here burnout. They've left without another job lined up. They're looking for better compensation, but there's more here. They're looking for flexibility. Work-life balance is huge, but there's also compensation and, of course, recognition. It really kind of depends on the age and stage in the career that they're at. The younger career building folks are looking for recognition. The older ones are like, leave me alone. There's also tax and employment law needs to be able to catch up to this new world. HR is struggling to handle people working in different countries, different regions. Compensation packages have to be considered, safety, labor laws. It's fascinating stuff. Over the last 2 years, we saw the shift from work from home online, mobility, freedom, no commute, and productivity skyrocketed for a lot of people. And we've seen early retirements and a growth in entrepreneurship as a result of this. And some are happily rocking the business up top and party on the bottom. Look, they like working from home, and they're now resisting the return to the office demands. BeUnsettled.co is an interesting company. They've been around since 2014, but arguably their timing is right to explode right now. I met the founder recently in an online networking group for the travel industry. This combines a 1-month travel experience with coaching and entrepreneurship community. It's 20s and 30s kind of focused, it appears, through the images. But when you dig deeper into some of the stories and the videos, you'll see more mature folks. Really, it's more defined by attitude than anything. But this is harnessing into that desire for freedom, independence, mobility, and entrepreneurship. It's really fascinating stuff. So the Great Resignation is and will continue to radically shift work and consumer consumption, as the brunt of the back to the office kicks in January 2022. We need to be ready, responsive, and relevant in this radically changing world. So how will it impact you? Know that there is a whole new segment out there that defines themselves by life balance, work on their own terms, and freedom. Many also cherish mobility and independence. Take a fresh look at your target audience. There's a good chance that these defining values and attitudes might resonate with them. How could you utilize that in your social media, in your community building, your email list, and your communications? Second consumer trend is fear remaining long-term. I introduced this concept last year, and I'm now pretty bullish that it has legs. The pandemic provoked fear. For some folks, that fear will linger on some level for a lifetime. Martin Lindstrom, a well-respected behavioral scientist, was the first to study this phenomena. Despite vaccines being largely available by now, we still have media and regulators reinforcing a culture of fear. Our social media is full of it, as are our traditional newspapers, TV, and radio. I took my first business trip by plane in October this past year to speak at a live event. It was 1,000 travel agents in Vegas. Believe me, I thought about it quite a bit before I actually took it, but it was an amazing opportunity. And I was it was reinforced knowing that they had a vaccine requirement or PCR test, and also the hotel had a masking policy. But it was still a big leap to jump out of that kind of fear zone. Americans have had some missteps in the pandemic, but I have to say that stepping away from Canada and Canada's media constant coverage and realizing that you could travel safely was a light bulb moment for me. No longer immersed in a culture of fear, I was able to see the impact by looking in from the outside. Think about that for a minute. So fear rewires the brain, and it rewires consumer behavior. Martin Lindstrom's original book, Biology, was a great book several years ago. It helped, and he's updated it with the pandemic. But the original book, Biology, was featured 2,000 brain scans on subjects from 6 countries. And it was the first ever book to apply neuroscience to the world of business. And so he's updated it during this time period of the pandemic. And his thesis is that we've been exposed to so much pandemic-related fear for so long that it will permanently rewire many consumer patterns. The coronavirus will eventually fade away, but the emotional impact will linger and infuse itself into our subconscious minds as fear. That fear will continue to impact our consumer behavior longer term as we navigate health, safety, separation, economics, and change. It's not unlike what it did for a generation who came of age in the 1930s, Depression, and World War II. If you have parents or grandparents who lived through the Depression, who are cautious about money, borrowing, leverage, who recycled wrapping paper, turned off the lights, turned down the heat, and were generally thrifty their entire life, that all stemmed from what Martin calls rational fear. It was a fear that catastrophe could strike again. Lindstrom believes that each generation will experience at least one major crisis. We got the pandemic. Some would argue that we got the bonus bundle with 9/11. His ideas might be disturbing to some people, but it can be framed with optimism if you realize that what is driving behavior in the back end of this, and you respond to it favorably. So the opportunities here might be acknowledging and recognizing where different clients are in terms of their comfort with risk. So our fear, there was a lot of fear early on in the pandemic around health, safety, separation. We're still seeing lingering fear around health, safety, and gathering and travel. We're likely rewired an entire generation's condition to fear and anxiety. The impact will be generational, and that disturbs me. But in every dark cloud, there is opportunity. And if we understand what is going on at this granular level, I'll leave you with that one. So fear remaining long-term. Fear is now ingrained in our habits. For some, admittedly, it's a minority, but it's still there. The fear of going out, the fear of travel, the fear on behalf of others, whether it be aging parents, kids and vaccines. Young children have been raised in a culture of fear. But there's also been long-term value shift related to fear by many as they reconcile what they'll tolerate or not. And that's changed our behaviors. So how will this consumer fear impact you? It depends on your customer base and your industry. Some have been impacted by this more than others. Travel industry, children, parents of young children, we need to be sensitive to the language that we use and reframing the message on social media and direct marketing to be cognizant of the longer term value shift and lingering fears. The third consumer behavior point is that we're now segmented and divided in all new ways. You need to toss out your consumer research from pre-2020. It's basically useless. Our individual experiences over the last 20 months will have defined our behaviors going forward. It's been said that we're all in the same boat. Well, let's face it. Some had leaky rafts and others were on luxury liners. We're now divided by new differentiators: risk tolerance, comfort with ambiguity, various fears in general, but also we're increasingly divided by things like vaccine mandates, politics, and even climate change. And our new behaviors have divided us in curious new ways. Some people will never return to a gym and have found new community online, for instance. The divisive lines have been further amplified by social media algorithms and news reporting, which of course is where we spent more time over the last 18 months. The pandemic has also created a whole new way to travel, and it's also created the necessity to be digitally savvy to travel. It has literally driven a stake into who can and cannot travel. And I'm not talking vaccine passports. Navigating PCR tests, proof of vaccine submission, QR code verifications, downloading various apps from different countries, changing regulations, different languages used in apps, need to update mobile phones with current operating systems. Travel has basically been eliminated for anyone who's not able to navigate a fairly complex digital mobile environment. Just ask anybody who's taken a trip recently. This type of segmentation example is a function of new regulations, and it's unlikely to go away anytime soon. So it's not just by our values that we've been resegmented, we've also been resegmented by regulations. Traditionally, this is the way we've segmented a market: demographic, geographic, psychographic, and behavioral. Psychographic, our values and beliefs, and behavioral, our buying habits and motivations, are where we've seen the most dramatic changes. But geographic has changed too. There's been a movement to outer areas, away from the city, more online buying. Also, the Great Resignation also spilled over into these impacts on how segments are now defined. So how will consumer segment changes impact you? The question is now, how well do you know your customers? As I said, your 2020 data is basically useless. So we need to get to know our customers with a new set of eyes. So some ideas, an audience survey on SurveyMonkey, ask for feedback in your weekly newsletter, your Facebook group, go live in your group, ask questions, engage, do a LinkedIn poll. But my personal favorite, one I have used and I intend to use again shortly, is to take 1 to 2 days and schedule 20-minute reoccurring segment interviews through Calendly, linked to your Zoom, and just talk to your customers. Invite them to book with you via your e-newsletter, social media, email invitation, whatever it might be. Fill your calendar, and then after that, it's too bad, so sad. Find out about their problems, concerns, but also get to know them in a very human way. Just asking and talking to them will probably win you valuable credit for being authentic and caring at this stage. You'll learn so much about their values, about their beliefs, their motivations, and their needs. And in doing that, you'll be in a position to better serve them as well. Fourth trend is the global recovery is happening at a different pace. Now, the global recovery has been staggered based on vaccine rates, new waves of infection, individual country approach. New Zealand and Australia had lockdown and border closure approach. It was very effective earlier on, but it's now being criticized as an example. Various industries and businesses have been impacted in different ways. Travel and tourism has had a huge hit. Global supply chain continue to be challenged. Not only by the pandemic, but also by climate change disasters, flooding, fires. We've seen those in California. We've been highly impacted here in British Columbia recently. We've learned that it was easier to shut businesses down than to ramp them up with interdependent supply chain links. And travel and restrictions of movement have varied. Attitudes towards risk, care for the collective society are different too, based on culture and values differences. Now, not to geek out on you with an academic application, but if you're familiar with Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory, this actually becomes really relevant in understanding how different countries responded to the pandemic and how their citizens are now reacting to those responses. For example, Canada, where I'm from, is an individualist-oriented society, but it's still more collectivist-oriented than the US. Canada scores 80 on individualism, but the US scores a 91, pretty much off the charts. And this perhaps helps explain individual freedoms and vaccine resistance in the US more so than in Canada. But we can see things around long-term orientation, restraint versus indulgence, uncertainty avoidance index. There's some really fascinating stuff. And if you just Google Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory, you can plug in your own country and compare it to others. And it's pretty enlightening to see some of those differences. Every state, province, country has had their own stages of recovery and milestones, ever evolving rules and regulations to go with it. This is from my BC province where I live. Consumers are tired. We're tired of trying to keep up with the shifting rules and the expectations. Melbourne, in the state of Victoria in Australia, had multiple lockdowns. They had 6 lockdowns, totaling 262 days since March 2020. They only recently lifted the last one in October. And Austria has had recent protests for COVID rules and lockdowns just this past week. Other countries in the EU, such as Germany, are being hit with the next wave, and Africa has a new variant of concern flagged by the WHO just recently. So the pace of recovery really depends on where you live and the industry that you're in. And of course, the customer base and their attitudes. And it's all governed by attitudes around risk, fear, and state control to a certain extent. We need to be aware of these geographic differences, and use different language to ensure that we remain relevant to our global audience. The fifth and final consumer trend is around Audacity, and I call it Audacity on steroids. It's probably my favorite one, if for no other reason than it is so hopeful. Past pandemics have always ushered in a period of audacity and innovation. When the Black Plague killed 1/3 of workers in Europe, the printing press came about, because there weren't enough scribes to create the written documents. Explorers set off for a new world, charting the unknown waters and new lands. It was a lot less risky than hanging out in a plague-ravaged country. Innovation and exploration flourished. The Spanish flu of 1918 locked down society, closed schools, theaters, mandated masks, protests. It all sounds rather familiar. The end of World War I collided with the end of the flu in 1920. And so it was a double whammy. And that ushered in the roaring 20s. There were a lot of business startups, women's rights emerged. There was a very vibrant creative scene, music and the arts. So some would argue that this is where we're headed now. And I tend to agree. Well, it's now clear that the last phase of the pandemic that we're currently in will be drawn out and painful until enough vaccines reach arms around the globe. What's certain is that COVID will leave behind a different world. It's already different. The pandemic will eventually abate, but the virus will likely survive, and we'll just learn to live with it. Seasonal flu with improved vaccines and variants. And, at some point we have to get on with life. And in the wake of that comes this attitude of audacity, risk, and innovation. And that's the stuff that excites me. And if you look closely, some of this has already arrived. Speaker friends who are unable to speak on live stages the last year wrote books during lockdown, and they're now hopping on planes, albeit, with their PCR tests and their masks, to share their message with the globe. Innovation startups in the IT industry alone grew by 20% in 2020 compared to 2019. And in a historical, audacious move this past summer, 2021, we witnessed a new space race of sorts. Jeff Bezos from Google launched a rocket to space intended to eventually commercialize citizen travel to a new frontier. In September, Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, launched SpaceX, curiously named Resilience, very much a reflection of our historic pandemic times. But it took a Brit, Richard Branson from Virgin, to be the first with this PR stunt. Flying to space, artificial intelligence, enhanced reality, genetic engineering, they're no longer subjects of 1970s comic books. They're real and they're happening. Audacity and innovation was accelerated by the pandemic. So how will it play out in consumer behavior is the question. We're seeing early signs of this in the travel industry. Those with a higher tolerance for risk are traveling broadly right now. I interviewed a 70-year-old traveler for an article published recently on my travel writing site, carryonqueen.com, called How to Go on Safari During the Pandemic. I'd encourage you to go check it out. It's carryonqueen.com because I only ever carry a bag. Anyway, don't check bags. It illustrates perfectly the calculated risk and audacious behavior. And of course, as we noted earlier, 40% of people plan to quit their job, many now seeking jobs with meaning and more flexibility. So Audacity is brave and fun-loving. You know, the Red Hat Society brought Audacity of empowerment of older women into the limelight. Are we all about to go off and buy red hats? Yeah, not unlikely. But we could start acting like empowered women. So Audacity makes big changes and decisions quickly. Do any of you know somebody who sold their house, moved to another area? People who are maybe long-standing in the community who made really dramatic moves over the last couple of years? I know several. Audacity makes big changes and decisions quickly. Audacity takes risks, and Audacity spends money freely to get what it really wants. Audacity creates and innovates, and Audacity doesn't care what others think. This article from Toronto Life about a career TD executive becoming a florist, finding creativity and pursuing it as part of giving her better life meaning. Audacity doesn't put off the future. Audacity lives it today. Audacity dares to dream big and live life large. Time to go out and charter that yacht. Maybe it's time to buy it, or at the very least, take a trip. Audacity is conscious of its time here and its impact on our world. Audacity creates memories with family and friends. And finally, Audacity invests in a better tomorrow. And this final consumer trend in all its audacious behavior is the one that gives me hope. But this is also where it all comes full circle again. Audacity buys into new innovation and bold technology. It's curious, it's receptive to new things, or at least to check them out. And Audacity is an attitude which sets us up for major leaps forward. This is where it all comes full circle with our global trends as well. So how will this play out for you? Audacity, risk, and innovation. How might these broad sweeping consumer trends impact your business? That's a good question. You know, how might you leverage sentiment of Audacity in your marketing communications? How can you capitalize on this right now with early adopters, knowing that the balance of consumers are likely to fall in line in the coming year? Perhaps tap into these sentiments of living life to the fullest, taking risks and making big changes in your social media, in your email, and in your communications. Rest assured, there's a lot going on right now. We've visited macro trends as well as consumer trends. We've been collectively off balance for over 20 months. So much has changed, and so much continues to change. But we're hanging on. And with a focus on the future, we'll learn to thrive in this new world that we emerge into. Thank you. I'll take some questions a little bit later, but I've been asked to make a couple of offers here. It being Thanksgiving and Black Friday. I've made my Marketing with Media course, which I mentioned a little bit earlier on, regularly retails for $349. I've got a Black Friday special, save $200. I've never made an offer like that before. It's always been save $100, $150. So this is $200 off for Grand Connection folks who are attending the seminar. Coupon code is GC200. If you visit 5minutemarketing.com, look at the top under courses, and then you can learn all about it. There's 6 modules. We look at your media from the perspective of owned, rented, earned, embedded, and paid media. Very much ties into that whole diversifying your media approach and not being completely susceptible to online, which I think is kind of come full circle in terms of your social media and your approach. And even just the one module on getting earned media and publicity is probably worth $149 on its own. So go check it out. Send me an email if you want to learn some more. There's a lot of detail on that page. There's a video, a bit of an introduction, but I encourage you to check it out. And if you like what you've learned and heard here today, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Mary Charleson. It's where I share marketing tips and insights, and videos often are embedded into my blog posts. But there's a wealth of knowledge and information on this channel, all there free for the taking for you. And finally, please do visit my marketing website, my marketing blog, 5minutemarketing.com. I've been publishing articles there since 2008. There's a wealth of knowledge to be shared. And also sign up for my 5-Minute Marketing Tips e-newsletter. It comes out every Sunday morning to your inbox. I share marketing tips. It's kind of it's almost like arrives like a letter from a friend. And a lot of folks share, enjoy it, find it useful. And it's a way that we develop a little bit more of a relationship and kind of bring you into my inner circle. So you can go to the website, you can sign up for the e-newsletter there, or you can just bounce me an email, mary@5minutemarketing.com, and I'd be delighted to tell you more about what you can find there on the website, about my speaking, my consulting, my workshops, as well as the course if you have some more curiosity about that. So thanks for attending today. It's been my pleasure, and have a good day.